Here is something most people never think about. Before you finish your first sentence, before you even take a breath to speak, before your brain has fully decided what words are coming out of your mouth, your body has already told the truth. Trained interrogators know this. And it is exactly why the most important moment in any conversation is not what someone says. It is what happens in the few seconds before they say anything at all. For seconds, that is the window. And inside that window, the human body leaks more honest information than most people share in an entire conversation. Now, you might be thinking, that sounds like something from a movie, like some kind of superpower that only works on criminals in a cold, gray interrogation room. But that is not how this works at all. This science applies everywhere. Job interviews, first dates, business deals, family conversations. Anywhere two human beings are talking and something real is on the line. The reason most people miss these signals is simple. Nobody ever taught them what to look for. And the few people who did try to learn got fed a list of random body language myths that do not actually work in real life. Things like crossed arms mean someone is defensive. Looking up to the right means they are lying. A firm handshake means confidence. That is not science. That is guesswork dressed up as knowledge. What actual trained interrogators use is completely different. It is not a checklist. It is not a trick. It is a system. A way of reading human behavior that is grounded in how the nervous system actually responds to pressure, fear, and the weight of carrying a secret. And once you understand the system, even at a basic level, you will never have a conversation the same way again. You will start noticing things you completely missed before. Small shifts, tiny changes, moments where someone's body quietly tells you something their words are trying to cover up. This is not about becoming suspicious of everyone around you. It is about becoming more aware, more present, more capable of understanding the people in your life on a much deeper level. So, let us start from the very beginning. Because before we talk about what to look for, we need to talk about why the body cannot help but give itself away. Think about the last time something scared you suddenly. Maybe a car cut you off on the highway. Maybe someone jumped out and startled you as a joke. Whatever it was, you did not decide to react. Your body just did it. Heart rate spiked, muscles tensed, eyes went wide, breath caught in your throat. You had zero control over any of that. That is the nervous system doing its job. And that same system, the one that fires up when you are scared or startled, is the exact same system that activates when a person is hiding something and feels the pressure being caught. The body does not know the difference between a physical threat and a social threat. To your nervous system, the fear of being caught in a lie feels almost identical to the fear of physical danger. And so it responds the same way. It leaks. One of the first things that changes is the eyes. Specifically, blinking. Blinking is almost entirely unconscious. You are not sitting here right now manually deciding when to blink. It just happens. And because it happens automatically, it is one of the most honest signals the body produces. When a person is calm and comfortable, their blink rate sits at a fairly normal pace. When stress enters the picture, real stress, the kind that comes from pressure and fear, the blink rate climbs, sometimes dramatically. A person under significant stress can blink at a rate that is 2 or 3 times higher than their normal baseline, without having any idea it is happening. They are focused on managing their words, controlling their expression, keeping their story straight. The blinking is the last thing on their mind, and that is exactly why it is one of the first things a trained observer notices. But blinking is just one piece. When the nervous system fires up, the eyes also tend to widen. This is called scleral exposure, meaning more of the white part of the eye becomes visible. It is an ancient fear response. Something deep in our biology that goes back thousands of years. And here is what makes it so fascinating. This response shows up in newborn babies. A baby that has never been taught anything, never learned any social rules, never had a single conversation, will show this exact same eye widening when it feels sudden fear or surprise. That tells you something important. These signals are not learned. They are built in, which means they are very, very difficult to fake or suppress. Then there's the voice. When cognitive load increases, meaning when the brain is working harder than usual, speech pattern shift. A person who normally answers a question in half a second might suddenly take 2 full seconds. Someone who speaks at a steady pace might slow down noticeably, or sometimes speed up, rushing through an answer to get past an uncomfortable moment as quickly as possible. And then there is something called pronoun dropping. This one is subtle but powerful. When people speak naturally and honestly, they use personal pronouns without thinking about it. I did this. We went there. She and I decided. The pronouns flow automatically because the person is simply describing something real that happened. But when someone is constructing a story rather than remembering one, the cognitive effort required goes up significantly. And one of the first things that quietly disappears under that pressure is the pronoun. Suddenly it is just, went home, watched a movie, went to bed, no I, no we, no us. Just a flat, pronoun-free description that sounds slightly off without most people being able to say exactly why. All of these signals, the blink rate, the eye widening, the vocal shifts, the disappearing pronouns, can appear and cluster together in under 4 seconds. That is the window trained interrogators are watching, not the full answer. The first 4 seconds of response. And the reason all of this works is not magic. It is simply biology. The body is always honest, even when the person wearing it is not. Here is where most people get this completely wrong. They watch a video like this or read an article somewhere, and they walk away thinking they now have a list of signs that mean someone is lying. He blinked fast, lying. She looked away, lying. He paused too long, lying. That is not how any of this works. And if you approach real conversations with that kind of checklist thinking, you are going to be wrong constantly. You're going to misread nervous people as liars. You're going to miscom, control liars entirely. And you are going to start treating the wrong people with suspicion. Trained interrogators do not think in checklists. They think in baselines and changes. Here is what that means. Every person has a behavioral baseline, a natural, default way of communicating when they are relaxed and comfortable. Some people are naturally fast talkers. Some people pause a lot when they think. Some people blink frequently. Some people use very few pronouns, even in normal conversation. Some people are naturally nervous in social situations. If you walk into a conversation and immediately start flagging every pause, every blink, every hesitation as suspicious, you are measuring against the wrong standard. You are comparing this person to some imaginary average human being that does not exist. What you should be doing is establishing that specific person's baseline first. Have a normal, low-stakes conversation. Ask easy questions. Notice the rhythm. Notice the pace. Notice the blink rate. Notice the vocabulary. Notice how long it takes them to respond. Notice whether they use pronouns naturally. That is your reference point. That is the ruler you're going to use for everything that comes after. And then, when you ask the question that matters, you're not asking yourself, does this person seem nervous? You are asking yourself, does this person seem different? Has something shifted from the baseline I just spent the last few minutes establishing? A change in blink rate matters. A sudden change in blink rate from an established baseline matters enormously. A pause before answering could mean anything. A pause that is significantly longer than every other pause this person has taken in this conversation. That is a data point worth paying attention to. Pronoun dropping in someone who's been naturally using pronouns throughout the conversation. That is a signal. Pronoun dropping in someone who never used many pronouns to begin with. That tells you almost nothing. This is the shift from amateur observation to professional level reading of human behavior. Stop looking for signs. Start looking for changes. Stop comparing people to a generic standard. Start comparing each person to themselves. This single mindset shift is what separates someone who vaguely thinks they can read people from someone who actually can. It takes patience. It takes the discipline to spend time building a baseline before rushing to judgment. But once you train yourself to think this way, your accuracy goes up dramatically. Because the truth is, there are no universal deception behaviors. There's only stress. And stress shows up as a change from normal. Your job is simply to notice when normal stops being normal. Now here is the part that most people find genuinely surprising. The signals we've been talking about, the blink rate changes, the eye widening, the vocal shifts, the pronoun dropping. None of them show up reliably unless there is something on the line, unless the person actually feels the weight of the moment. This is why lie detector tests and high-pressure interviews work better than casual conversations when it comes to catching deception, not because the technology or the questions are magic, but because the environment creates genuine stakes. And genuine stakes create genuine stress. And genuine stress produces the behavioral signals that trained observers are looking for. Think about it this way. If someone asked you to pretend a rubber duck was a golden eagle and convinced them of it, with zero consequences either way, you would probably do it pretty comfortably. You would describe the feathers, the wingspan, the sharp beak. And because nothing is on the line, your body would stay completely calm. No stress signals, no behavioral changes, clean delivery. Now imagine the same scenario, but this time, if they catch you in the lie, you lose your job. Suddenly everything changes. Your body knows the stakes even if your brain is trying to stay cool. And those stress signals start leaking through whether you want them to or not. This is why skilled interrogators and sharp communicators do something deliberate before asking the most important question in a conversation. They raise the stakes consciously. They frame the question in a way that makes it feel significant, heavy, important. Something like, I want to ask you something, and before I do, I need you to think very carefully about your answer, because what you say next matters more than you might realize. That is not a threat. It is not aggressive. It is just a simple reframe that signals to the other person's nervous system. This moment is serious. Pay attention. And the moment their nervous system registers that signal, the stress response activates, and the behavioral signals that follow become much easier to read. You can use this in real-life situations too, not to manipulate or corner people unfairly, but to cut through comfortable vagueness and get to honest, considered responses. Before an important conversation with a partner, a colleague, a friend, frame the question with appropriate weight. Give it the significance it deserves. And then watch what the body does in the second that follow. Because pressure does not create deception. It reveals it. The person who has nothing to hide responds to raised stakes with calm confidence. The person who is carrying something responds very differently. Now we get into practical tools. The actual techniques that trained interrogators use to move from suspicion to clarity. The first one is called the bait question, and it is one of the most elegant psychological tools in this entire field. Here's how it works. Imagine you are speaking with someone you suspect may have done something. You do not have definitive proof, but you have reason to believe they were involved. Instead of accusing them directly, which immediately puts them on the defensive and gives them a chance to prepare their denial, you ask a question that creates a dilemma. You say something like, before I continue, I need to ask you something important. Is there any reason at all that a security camera in that area might have footage showing your car nearby that night? Now the person sitting across from you faces a choice with no good options. If they are guilty, if they say no, and you then produce footage or even suggest that footage exists, they have just made themselves look like a liar. And in most people's minds, a liar probably has something to hide. If they say yes, they have just placed themselves at the scene. They have given you exactly the connection you were looking for. The person who is genuinely innocent, however, faces no dilemma at all because they have nothing to hide. They simply say no, confidently, without hesitation. No calculation, no pause, just a clean, uncomplicated answer, because the question holds no threat for them. The beauty of the bait question is that you do not actually need to have the footage. The question works regardless, because the guilty person does not know what you have. And that uncertainty, that gap between what they know they did and what they think you might know, creates enormous internal pressure, and that pressure produces signals. The second technique is the punishment question, and this one works on everyone from hardened adults to 7-year-old kids. When you suspect someone of something, instead of asking, did you do this, you ask, what do you think should happen to the person who did this? The person who did not do it has no personal stake in the answer. They will typically suggest a fair, proportionate consequence, or they will express genuine sympathy for whoever was affected. The person who did do it faces a completely different internal experience, because whatever punishment they suggest, they know they are essentially suggesting it for themselves. and that knowledge shapes their answer in a very revealing way. They will almost always suggest something notably lighter than what an uninvolved person would, because on some level, they are already negotiating their own fate. They want the consequences to be survivable. The contrast between two people's answers to the same punishment question is often so stark that it practically answers a question of guilt on its own. One person says the consequences should be severe and just. The other person quietly suggests that maybe it was not such a big deal, and perhaps some leniency would be reasonable. That gap tells you almost everything you need to know. Everything we have covered so far might sound like it belongs in a police procedural or a government training manual, but the reality is, these skills are just as relevant in your everyday life as they are in a formal interrogation setting. Think about a first date. You are sitting across from someone new. You do not know their history, their patterns, their character yet. You are trying to get a genuine read on who this person actually is, not just a version they are presenting to impress you. Everything we have talked about applies directly to that situation. Establish their baseline early through easy, comfortable conversation. Then pay attention when questions with more personal weight come up. Notice the shifts, not to be paranoid, but to be present and aware. Think about a business negotiation. You're trying to understand whether the other side is genuinely flexible on their position, or whether they are playing a game, whether the deadline they mentioned is real or manufactured, whether their confidence is earned or performed. A trained eye watching for behavioral changes during a negotiation has a significant advantage over someone who is only listening to words. Think about parenting. Kids are actually terrible liars when you know what to look for, not because they are less intelligent, but because they have not yet built up the practice composure that adults develop over years of social experience. Their stress signals are louder, their behavioral changes are more dramatic, and techniques like the punishment question work on children almost immediately because they have not encountered them before and have no defense against them. Think about friendships. Sometimes you get a feeling that a friend is not being fully honest with you about something, maybe about how they really feel, maybe about something that happened. Most people either ignore that feeling or confront it clumsily and make things awkward. But with the skills in this video, you have a more nuanced option. You can pay attention. You can raise the weight of a question slightly when the moment is right. You can watch for the change that tells you something is being held back. The goal in all of these situations is not to catch people and prove they are liars. The goal is simply to understand what is actually happening beneath the surface of a conversation. To be the kind of person who is genuinely difficult to manipulate because you are paying attention at a level that most people simply are not. That awareness, that calm, steady attention to human behavior is worth more in real life than almost any other social skill you can develop. Before you close this video and go try to read everyone around you, there is one final thing that matters more than any technique we have discussed. No single signal proves anything. One blink rate change means nothing on its own. One pause means nothing on its own. One drop pronoun, one subtle eye widening, one slightly soft answer to a punishment question. None of these things alone are enough to conclude that someone is lying or hiding something. What you are building when you watch for these signals is a picture, a collection of data points. And it is only when multiple signals cluster together, when the blink rate changes, and the pronouns disappear, and the pause stretches longer than usual, and the eyes widen slightly, that the picture starts to tell a real story. Even then, even when several signals appear at once, your conclusion should not be this person is lying. Your conclusion should be this moment deserves more attention. There is something here worth understanding better, because the alternative, jumping to conclusions based on incomplete reads of human behavior, causes real damage. It poisons trust. It creates false accusations. It makes you the person who is impossible to have a genuine conversation with because everyone around you feels like a suspect. The best people in the world at reading human behavior are also typically the most patient, the most curious, and the most genuinely interested in understanding rather than judging. They use these skills to get closer to the truth, not to win arguments or expose people or feel superior. So take what you have learned here and use it with that kind of intention. Be more observant. Be more present. Pay attention to the baseline. Notice the changes. Ask better questions. Raise the stakes when the moment calls for it. And remember, the goal is never to prove someone wrong. The goal is simply to understand what is real. Because in a world where everyone is managing their image and filtering their words and presenting the version of themselves they want you to see, the ability to quietly, calmly read what is actually happening beneath all of that is one of the most valuable things a person can have. Stay curious, stay observant, and pay attention to what changes, because that is always where the truth begins to show itself.